All right, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third and final Real Talk panel series. My name is Nancy Mack, and on behalf of Drexel Neuroscience Graduate Students for Diversity Group, I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us today. Our presentation and panel discussion today will be focused on gaining experience in STEM research. Throughout the presentation, we invite you to submit questions to our panelists using the Q&A feature, and we will have an open panel discussion with some new panelists you haven't seen before if you've been attending our previous Real Talk sessions. And we'll discuss these questions at the end of the presentation. And so now to get our presentation started, I'd like to hand it over to our presenter, Sadie.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Can somebody just give me a little thumbs up or something?
You're good, we can hear you.
Great, thank you. So as Nancy said, my name is Sadie, and I am a fourth year neuroscience PhD candidate at Drexel University College of Medicine. I'm also the president and one of the founders of NGSD. So we'd really like to welcome everybody who's here for the first time, and we'd like to welcome anybody back who's been to any of our other Real Talk panel series. So what is NGSD? We're the Neuroscience Graduate Students for Diversity, and we're a newly formed student organization at Drexel College of Medicine. But we also have members in different departments and from different schools. And so when we say diversity, we include diversity of all kinds from race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, neurodiversity, and more. But our primary goal for the upcoming year and for the next few years is to foster Black and African American representation in the neurosciences. And so our aims are to increase awareness of and diversity in STEM, provide education on neuroscience topics and research, and provide mentorship to local students. And we also hope to better the environment of higher education to improve retention from people from diverse backgrounds, because evidence shows that science is better when it's inclusive and intersectional. And so as Nancy said, this is the third and final of our Real Talk panel series. And so today we'll be sharing our perspective on all things graduate school in STEM, specifically STEM research. And so a little bit of an outline of what you're going to hear today. First, we're going to talk about what is neuroscience research. So first and foremost, we are the Neuroscience Graduate Students for Diversity. So that means we're really only experts in neuroscience graduate programs and our specific graduate programs. But the rest of the series will talk about research during undergrad, after undergrad. And so these will really be applicable to any sort of STEM program inside or outside of neuroscience. But you can take what we say with a little bit of a grain of salt because things are going to be different at different universities. So let's get started. So what is neuroscience research? So I really love neuroscience because it's super interdisciplinary. And so everybody on our panel here today, most of us are within the same program, but we study vastly different projects, which I think is really cool. So different approaches include preclinical research at the cellular level, motor systems, behavioral systems, molecular biology, neuroengineering, and all sorts of different combinations. For example, I'm a cellular neuroscientist studying development, but I also study certain behavioral and systems level changes. We also have cognitive research and clinical research where you can work with human populations and also different disease models, as well as different basic science problems. So with neuroscience research, I think you can really study pretty much everything that you want in terms of biomedical sciences. And so now we're going to move into research during undergrad. And again, as another reminder, this is pretty much applicable to most STEM research. And so most of you guys are here right now, if you can see my pointer, in that really great phase of before grad school, and I'm going to research whatever I want. So for you guys, the world of research is really wide open right now, and you can hop around, you can experiment with different topics, and it's just going to make you a better scientist, I think. And so we will just begin from there. So asking about research opportunities. You don't know what type of research opportunities are available at your university until you ask. And so we've sort of broken it down into 3 different types of ways to get involved in research in undergrad. You can do independent studies where you might be working in a lab or doing research with a professor. And sometimes this can count as a course credit. You can also do work study, so you might be able to actually get paid to do your research, which is great. And there are also different summer programs. So you can do research over the summer, sometimes it's funded, and this could be at either your school or at different schools. So how do you reach out and figure out what opportunities are really available at your school? If any of you have some favorite classes or some favorite professors, you can reach out to them and see if they're doing any research. Or you can search for research being done at your university. I would say the university website is really the best tool for you guys to look around and find researchers and their different profiles. A lot of researchers have some really great websites that you can look at. And then your next step will be to reach out to professors whose work seems interesting to you and ask if they're taking students. So you could either try going to your office hours or sending them an email. And so this was mainly my way of getting involved in research in undergrad. I did 3 years worth of research during the semester and 1 summer program. But the way that I got involved and reached out to my professors was just literally by cold calling them via email. And some of my professors I had never even spoken to before. I just found their research on our department website and I thought that it was really interesting. And so those cold calling emails can be really, really anxiety provoking and kind of awkward. And so I've dropped my email right here, sb3776@drexel.edu. If anybody has any questions for how to draft that type of email, or if anybody wants an extra set of eyes on those emails, because I know that they can be awkward, but at least for me, I found that they were successful. So you can also ask your advisor if they know how to get involved in research, or if you're lucky enough to have an undergraduate research office, you can reach out to them too. It's also important to note, so my undergraduate university also had an undergraduate research office, but I found that the different labs that were available through the research office didn't quite fit with what I wanted to do. So I ended up creating my own opportunities, again, by just cold calling professors. So you're really free to move around within your institution. And so it's good to start thinking about these things and talking to your advisors as early as possible in your college career. And so here is a little bit about summer research opportunities. So you can do programs within your university. Here's an example of one. Students tackling advanced research programs, or STAR students. So this program is available at many different universities, but it might have a slightly different name. So for example, at Bryn Mawr, we know that there's the Summer Science Research Scholarship, and at Harvard, there's the Kins Summer Scholars and the Lay Fellowship. And interestingly, at Haverford, they fund research at their school or at other off-campus institutions too. And so again, these opportunities might come under different names, but most schools have them. They're often paid and they usually provide housing. And some of them also provide meals, which is great. So if you don't have any opportunities that really fit well with you at your university, you can also participate in research programs at other universities. For example, there's the SURF program, or the Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship. And so these are available through multiple institutions. Drexel and the University of the Sciences both have these programs, for example, and they're usually paid. Sometimes provide housing, but often not. And frequently these experiences are targeted towards sophomores and juniors, but you can plan early. Another form of summer programs is summer research programs are within national programs. For example, REUs, or Research Experiences for Undergrads, through the National Science Foundation. And so you'll see right here, our presentation's gonna start having a lot of different links. And so Candace is just gonna drop those links in the chats for you guys so that you can save them and go through them whenever you want. So the first one, like we said, is at the NSF, and they have opportunities in all disciplines of science, and they allow you to research at another institution anywhere in the country. And so the NIH, or the National Institutes of Health, also have a summer research internship. And so these are specifically biomedical sciences research, whereas NSF is more sort of solving basic science problems. And so these fellowships take place at the NIH in North Carolina. And so it's important to note that a lot of these research opportunities through the NIH and through NSF are usually only for American citizens, but a lot of the programs through your schools are available to international students too. And so now we're going to talk about the different types of undergrad research and how faculty admissions teams sort of rank them amongst each other. So this is the opinion of a faculty member on our admissions team. And so it'll give you a good idea of how grad schools look at these different research opportunities. And so the theme of this is the more research in undergrad, the better. And some experience is always better than no experience. So if you have one summer of research, that's better than no research, and it shows your interest. One semester shows that you are interested in research and you have the ability to balance both lab work and classwork. But multiple semesters are better than one. But of course, we understand that not all of these opportunities are easily available to everyone, especially if you have a job. And it really takes a certain amount of privilege to have time to be able to participate in these types of programs. So if you are feeling like you're not able to participate in these for whatever reason, don't panic, because research after undergrad is also a great way to get experience before applying to graduate school, and is also really highly valued. So that's what we'll discuss next, is research after undergrad. So one way to get research experience after undergrad is with post-bac or post-baccalaureate programs. So what this is a program that will give you research experience and sometimes classes after undergrad that might prepare you for graduate school or medical school. Many of them are paid, and they offer opportunities in many different areas of science. And so this Pathways to Science link that will get dropped in the chat is sort of like a search engine and a postings of many different post-bac programs. So right now, I'm going to introduce Kendall, who is a first-year PhD student in the neuroscience graduate group at the University of Pennsylvania, to talk to you about examples of post-bac programs, because she's participated in one herself and is clearly highly successful now that she's at an Ivy League school in a PhD program. So take it away, Kendall.
Hello, everyone. So yes, post-baccalaureate programs. I was an athlete, and so I didn't have time to do research in the semester. And then for summers, I always had to come back early for practice. So I wasn't really able to do summer research programs because of how long they were. So I decided after graduating undergrad and to do a post-bac, because I didn't really understand what I wanted to research. And so I went into prep. I did prep at Hopkins, but prep is literally offered at a ton of institutions. And I know there's one offered at Penn, different institutions literally all over the world, from UCLA to Virginia Commonwealth. So essentially at prep, you're like a scholar. So you get a year or two to do research, and with a PI, a principal investigator, that you're interested in their research. You get paid and you take classes. You get to try to work on your science communication. You're often funded to go to one conference. And so this really is an opportunity for you to learn more about yourself and your science and what it means to do research. I really appreciated this because I felt like I was able to understand what I wanted to research and felt better prepared about talking about my science interest when I went to my graduate school interviews. Also, there's a ton of fee waivers for prep, which was really great, and I didn't have to pay for any of my applications. The first one that you see, NIH IRTA. NIH IRTA is really great. It tends to be 2 years, and you're like a research assistant for a lab at NIH, often in Bethesda, Maryland. And so here, it's a chance for you to get to understand what it is to research, what type of research you want to do. And these 2 years, most people who do NIH IRTA get to land on a paper or write their own first author paper, which is really great. Graduate schools are really impressed by that. Before coming into graduate school, that's really great. And then ORISE offers a lot of opportunities for science and engineering, just in case like you're not really interested in the biomedical kind of science or basic sciences. It's a really great opportunity, and they have different institutes for their research for post-baccalaureates. However, it's currently suspended for COVID, but it's really nice to know that this exists. And PrEP and NIH IRTA are currently still going on. They're doing a lot of virtual research, or depending on the institution and the state that you choose to apply to, some people are still going into the labs. And then CDC is in Atlanta, and they have a lot of opportunities. And if you're really interested in disease control, this is obviously a really good time because of the pandemic. So you will have a lot of hands-on experience doing a post-baccalaureate there. All of these post-baccalaureates really give you an opportunity to just understand your science, kind of take a break from school. I know that I was overwhelmed when I graduated. So it's really a nice time to get to be with yourself as a scientist. And I highly encourage doing a post-baccalaureate, whether you want to get on a paper or whether you just want to not go straight into graduate school yet and understand what type of research you like. I think these are great opportunities that you guys can all look into.
Awesome. Thank you, Kendall. Okay. So next, we are going to talk about research technician or research assistantships before graduate school after you've graduated. And so for this, I'll introduce Tara. She is a PhD student in Drexel's molecular cell biology and genetics program, but she's doing her dissertation research in a neuroscience lab. So when we break out later to have some discussions, you guys can ask her about that really interesting experience. So take it away, Tara.
Thank you, Sadie. So we just want to talk a little bit about another option you can do after you graduate your undergrad. If you're not quite ready to go into a post-bac program, maybe you don't want to do more school and you want to focus strictly on research, a great opportunity is to be a research technician or assistant. So what it is basically just getting more experience working in the lab hands-on. And every lab needs lab techs and assistants. They essentially keep the lab running. They're paid because they're a job, so you're getting paid salary or hourly, and they're all over Pennsylvania. Of course, Jefferson, Penn, Drexel always has them. So if you're interested in a certain lab at a certain university, I think it's actually a good idea to ask if they need research techs, because then if you're in the lab already, that can also help you get into their graduate school programs. The best way to apply is to go on things like Indeed or like Snagajob, where you can like swipe and just keep applying and just apply to 1,000. You're probably not going to get answers from all of them, but if you keep going and keep pushing, you'll likely get one. I was lucky enough, I was a research tech at a fertility doctor's office for a couple years, which really allowed me to get hands-on research experience, but I also got to see the patient side of things. So it's good for me to decide if I wanted to go to medical school versus graduate school. So it's super important that the research that you do during these techs or assistants is the same stuff that you're going to do when you get into grad school. So if you have these skills down before you get there, once you get into grad school, they're going to be so impressed by what you can do, and it'll definitely help your chances of getting into these schools.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. Okay, and so then the last opportunity that we'll talk about is this really prestigious scholarship called the Fulbright Scholarship. And so what this scholarship allows you to do is after graduation, you can go and do research in a foreign country, and this is always funded. And so it allows you to research many different areas of research in many different countries. And so it's a really cool and again, a really, really prestigious scholarship and an opportunity. And so for applying, first you have to find a foreign institute or a host institute for your affiliation and possibly a program advisor at your own school. And so it also requires designing and proposing a research project, which can sound a little bit intimidating if you haven't done that before. But once you find yourself an advisor and somebody who wants to take you in the lab, most of the time they will really help you and guide you through that process. It'll also give you experience in just applying for scholarships and fellowships. And so that's a really important skill to have, even if you don't win the scholarship. And so these two links here are really, really useful, and we'll answer any other questions that you might have. And so obviously there's a few things we need to keep in mind, the big one being the COVID effect. And so many research opportunities right now look different because of COVID. And trust me, admissions teams at graduate schools are very, very aware. And so they're also pushing to be more aware of the intersection of racism, COVID-19, and inequality. And so it's still a good idea to reach out and see what programs are being offered at your school and what your options are. So you may actually be able to work in a lab virtually and still get some research experience. And so this will look really different depending on what your research field is. So for example, programs involving math, computer science, and bioinformatics, that research looks kind of the same right now as it did pre-COVID, because a lot of it is computer-based. But biology and neuroscience research experiences may be very different right now, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. So for example, we've had a few summer scholars at Drexel, and so you might be able to work on a literature review, help design or plan projects, or even analyze data. And also many post-bac programs are still taking applications, and many labs are still hiring research technicians and assistants. And so it's also important to note that right now, a lot of research is considered essential business, but you really have to weigh the pros and cons of coming into a lab and potentially exposing yourself to this virus, because virtual research experiences exist and they're still definitely highly valued by research admissions committees. And so also some things to keep in mind when applying to graduate school: no matter what research experience you have, even if you're a Fulbright scholar, you've done years of research, nobody will want to admit you to graduate school if you can't discuss your research. So that is the most important thing that you can get out of your research experience, is being able to talk about what you did, the problem that you were working on, and really sort of like interpret your results and have a scientific conversation. And so to get practice with this, you can try talking to the PI or other lab members to get a good understanding of what research you're doing. And many programs actually culminate with a presentation to your peers or your department. And so this is a really great way to get practice talking about your work. And so next, we'll talk about our journey to graduate school and in neuroscience. So Nancy, do you want to introduce the panelists, or would you just like me to start?
You can go ahead and start. Let me get everybody on screen real quick.
Great. Okay, so I will start with my journey to neuroscience. So I went to the University of Miami in Florida, and I started out with a major in marine biology and just a passion to be on the dance team. That was the beginning of my journey. And so about 6 months into my marine biology major, I decided that that really wasn't for me, and I switched to a psychology major. And so I was really interested in psychology. I got started in some psychology research, but then I realized that interacting with patients or being a therapist or doing research with human participants wasn't exactly something that was right for me. So I'm someone who's always really liked cells and cellular biology. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can combine my psychology interests with my cell biology interests and switch my major to neuroscience. And so this was pretty late in my career. I was ending my sophomore year, starting my junior year. And I was told that there was no room for me in the neuroscience major. So I thought that that was going to be the end of my neuroscience dreams. They said I would have to add at least an extra year onto my degree. And as we all know, school is expensive, so that wasn't going to be an option. So instead, what I did, I was like, okay, what can I pick and choose, and what can I do to give myself the best foundation to maybe do this research later? So I talked to a bunch of people, and I decided if I added, a biochemistry second major, I would be able to really take psychology, take my love of cell biology, and put them together. So next, I got some research experience in biochemistry, molecular biology, and I finally ended with a rotation in a neuroscience lab. And so that was where I was like, okay, this is great. But then I was applying to graduate programs in neuroscience without ever taking a neuroscience class. And so with some programs, they really like people from diverse scientific backgrounds. They think that you can really integrate new knowledge and think about problems in a different way. But an equal number of programs don't like that. They really want you to be strict with neuroscience. So it really just depends on where you're applying and how you sell yourself. So make sure that you apply to a broad range of programs. And so, as I said, I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate now at Drexel University College of Medicine, and I study brain development, and I specifically study how neurons take the appropriate shape so that they can connect with each other. And so what does that mean for a functional brain? What happens if these shapes are just slightly off? What type of developmental disorders occur? And how can we potentially get these cells to form the right shapes and the right connections? So that's what I'm currently doing.
Thank you, Sadie. Kendra, would you like to introduce yourself and your journey to neuroscience next?
So I'm Kendra. I'm actually a first year student at DuPont. I did my undergrad at Drexel University main campus. I was a bio major. Kind of like a lot of bio majors coming in, I wanted to be a medical doctor and quickly found out that that was not for me. Um, so I didn't have the strongest college career in the beginning until I found that Drexel offered a neuroscience minor, and I got involved with that, and I absolutely fell in love with neuroscience. And I was extremely lucky to be able to get into a neuroscience lab as an undergrad. I did start very late, so I didn't join my undergrad lab until my senior year. So pretty late in the game. And then I was also just really lucky with the timing that my PI for my undergrad lab wanted to hire me as a technician right out of college. So I had a little bit of undergraduate research, and then I had 2 years of basically being a tech. It was such a great experience, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. You really do get to learn like what it's like to be in a lab. My PI treated me like a junior grad student, essentially, same expectations and everything. And I mean, I credit a lot of that to why I'm here at Drexel University College of Medicine. And yeah.
Thanks, Kendra. Tara, you gave us like a little bit of introduction into your research background, but do you want to kind of give us a full story?
Sure. So I started at Rowan University. I ran track there, which is kind of what brought me there to begin with. So I wasn't really into the science. I was a bio major. Because I was a bio major, I ended up quitting track my junior year, which then brought me into research. So I was in about 3 different labs at Rowan University, from everything from stem cells to plant cells, where we were literally taking bark from a tree and trying to make plant cells in a dish. From after graduating at Rowan in 2016, I started working at the Reproductive Medicine Associates of New Jersey and gained a lot of lab research or lab experience. And so I worked there for 2 years, which then solidified my want to go into research. So then I applied to Drexel's Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics, which is a mouthful program, because I was more interested in the cell stuff versus the neuroscience. And then I started rotating in different labs at Drexel, everywhere from bioinformatics to RNA. And then I ended up in Dr. Lane's lab, where I studied spinal cord injury. And I just kind of fell in love with neuroscience because it kind of intimidated me at first, but now I'm not as scared of it. So that's where I ended up now. So we study spinal cord injury and different kinds of neural transplants within the spinal cord, and then study breathing after.
Thanks, Tara. Candace, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Candace. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the neuroscience program at Drexel. I went to Arizona State, and I started as a biochem major when I started college because I figured I liked biology and liked chemistry. So biochem is putting those 2 things together. Turns out I really hate biochem. So that didn't last very long. So I realized as I was taking my classes and I was allowed to pick electives, I was choosing a lot of psychology electives. And when I went to my advisor, because I wasn't doing great in OChem, she was like, "You're like really close to getting a psychology major." And I was like, "Oh, great. So I'll just switch then." So I dropped biochem and I started my psychology degree. And I realized that I really liked neuroscience as well. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between the 2 of them. But unfortunately, my undergrad didn't have a neuroscience degree, neuroscience program, neuroscience classes. It's like they never heard the word before. So that was really unfortunate. So I ended up working as for credit in a psychology lab, and to try to get experience on a whim, I applied to summer internships in neuroscience, and I interned the summer of my junior year at Princeton in their Neuroscience Institute, and I completely fell in love with neuroscience. I loved the hands-on experience. It was so much fun. And then when I got back to my university that fall, I talked to my advisor, and my school added a neurobiology major. And once again, she was like, "Oh, you've been taking so many like electives that you're almost close to getting a neurobio major." And I'm like, "Great." So I ended up getting a degree in neurobiology and psychology. So I had a little bit of neuroscience-y classes and then some psychology classes. And then I completely just cold called people to try to figure out what kind of neuroscience research I really wanted to go into. And it turns out I was really fascinated with learning and memory. So applying to graduate schools, I ended up getting into Drexel. And now I study fear memory to try to look at neural circuitry that underlies things like PTSD to help people who suffer from that and hopefully come up with therapeutics in the future.
Thank you, Candace. And Kendall, do you want to wrap up our journey into neuroscience before we kick off some questions?
Yeah, so I essentially needed to pay for school. So I got a volleyball scholarship, and I was trying to figure out what school I was going to go to because I knew I wanted to do neuroscience. And everyone told me, you can't be an athlete and do neuroscience, it's too demanding. So I was like, okay, I'll do biochem with a minor in psych and sports. And they were like, that's too demanding, except for one school. And that's where I went, to Hampton University in Virginia. And it was still very demanding, but they were able to work with me, which was really nice. And so essentially there was no neuroscience at my school, and we had a physiological psychology class that was taught by a professor who actually had his PhD in neuroscience. And I was like, oh, great. So that was my little neuroscience fix during undergrad. And then I, like I said earlier, could not get any research. So I was able to do half of a REU at New York University, and they allowed me to leave early, which was really great. And I studied learning and memory for a couple of weeks, and I was like, oh, I really like this. But I was very intrigued by everything, so I had no clue what I wanted to research because just everything about the brain was interesting to me. So that's when I went into prep and did research on schizophrenia related behaviors. And somehow between my experiences, I was like, I'm interested in traumatic brain injury. Don't know where that came from, but that's how I got into grad school. And I now study traumatic brain injury currently because of the pandemic from a computational aspect. But my hope is to use animal models, use people, and study biomarkers. So there's a better way that we can diagnose traumatic brain injury. So that's my journey.
Thanks, Kendall. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get this Q&A started off.
We just have one more little slide, Nancy.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Totally fine. So this is just like, so as you guys have heard, we have some pretty different journeys into neuroscience, and we're pretty a group that comes from a lot of different backgrounds. So we just wanted to show you guys some of that, like mathematically. So first of all, around 30% of NGSD members are first generation college students. Around 50% of them only found out that a PhD and a career in research were options in college or later. Again, a little bit over 46% took some time off between undergrad and graduate school. And then the vast majority of people worked in research in their time off. So then that's it. Feel free to do the Q&A now.
That's really great. So there's actually one question we have in the Q&A that I really want to, that fits in really well with these graphs. So I'm gonna go ahead and start us off with this one. To the panelists, what advice do you have for someone who wants to go to graduate school in neuroscience, but their research experience is in another area, like chemistry or biology? What pros and cons do you see there, and kind of what advice do you have about that? So I see Kendall nodding her head, so I'm going to see if Kendall wants to start this one off for us.
Yeah, I can do that. My advice is go after it, because when you talk to a lot of PIs, most of them didn't have neuroscience as an option anyway. And they often started their research interest from chemistry or biology, or just something not related to neuroscience. But then you learn often that everything is also related to neuroscience. You can pull the brain into literally any and everything, or the spine to literally everything. So I say go after it. Don't let that stop you. Like Candace talked about earlier, psychology may majors are in neuroscience programs. I have someone in my program who they were a music major. So there's literally a lot of different ways and avenues that are extremely valued in the neuroscience program, and people like that extra input because it helps us not live in an echo chamber of research. So don't let that stop you. Don't feel discouraged, and your input and knowledge will be valued.
Tara, I feel like you had some research experience that was way outside the realm, like kind of the realm of what you're doing now. So you want to add to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I was not neuroscience my whole undergrad. Even my first year of graduate school, I wasn't even neuroscience, and I ended up in a neuroscience lab. So absolutely, I say if you are interested in it, to absolutely go for it. Like Kendall was saying, I think my best advice is to also take other classes, because you're going to end up taking some kind of core curriculum in your graduate school. So that you're going to probably do better than some neuroscience kids in those classes if you come from a cellular background or not psychology as well. But definitely go for it. Don't let it intimidate you, because it definitely intimidated me. You'll be okay. You'll have the knowledge that you gain. You'll have the study skills that you get from doing any undergraduate will definitely help you into your graduate career.
Absolutely. Does if any other panel members want to jump in, or if not, I can go ahead and jump to the next question.
So I'll just say, sell yourself too. So when you come into graduate school, if you have any type of research experience, they just want to know that you can function as a researcher. And so when I got interviews at graduate schools, I remember I literally apologized to some of the people who I interviewed with that I didn't have any neuroscience experience. I was like, I'm sorry, I know I've never taken a class, and I know I've never done any traditional research, but so you have to be confident and figure out a way to sell yourself. As Kendall said, everything can come back to the brain or the spinal cord. So if you figure out why you're passionate about wanting to do neuroscience and you can spin your research experience to fit that, then people often really like that.
So another question just came in that's really related to this. And it says, what if I only have psychology research experience? Is that enough for neuroscience? So I'll start that off and say, yes, absolutely. And I only just want to say that because I majored in psychology and worked in psychology labs, and that was my only, research experience before graduate school. And so to echo what Sadie said, it's more having the experience in some type of research. Candace, do you, as someone else who studied psychology, do you have anything to say about psychology research experience?
Yeah, I was going to say it's definitely enough. There's a lot more overlap than I think people realize between psychology and neuroscience. Like everything, they're related. They are both how the brain functions, and like the output of people's behavior is all what neuroscience and psychology is. So it's definitely enough. And same thing with having research in different areas. It really just shows that you're able to be a researcher in any capacity, which is what a lot of programs or PIs are looking for in general. So it's definitely enough to just have psychology research. Like, it's not even just psychology research. The fact that you have any research is very helpful.
Absolutely. And to reiterate, what Sadie said, sell yourself. So if the only experience you have is working with humans in some type of like psychology program, then what you want to say to maybe an admissions committee is, hey, I have a ton of research experience. I know I like research, but from my experiences, I know that I want to be more committed to animal models now, maybe. And so it's okay that you maybe haven't done what you're interested in doing if it's maybe shaped what you want to do next. So this is a question for a few people on our panel who have worked as technicians or also in post-bac programs. So if you guys are comfortable sharing, one of our questions are interested in how much you're paid in these positions. Do you normally make money like as a post-bac program? Can you kind of live on your own? So can any of our panelists speak to that?
Yeah, I can start. So, like I said, I was a research technician for 2 years at Drexel main campus. I was hourly, but my salary was about $30,000 a year, which was enough for me to live on. Like I was able to live on my own with roommates. I was able to feed myself. I had a dog and some cats, so enough for me to be able to take care of myself and also like be able to do the things that I wanted to. It wasn't super restrictive.
I can also add that what I got paid for prep at Hopkins is currently what I'm getting paid at Penn. So yes, you get a good stipend that you can live off of, and I know that it varies based off of your standard of living in your area. Also, may vary based off of your lab and how much money your PI makes, if it's coming straight from them versus a grant. But you will be taken care of most of the time. I've never heard of a post baccalaureate that doesn't take care of you. So I think you're in pretty good hands if you take that route.
I'll also just add, since I worked for a company, I made a little bit more than I'm making now in graduate school. And because it was based in North Jersey, which is a little bit of a ritzier area. So it is definitely, it's possible if you go to a company that you're going to make a little bit more, but still get that same experience. If you want to then save money to then go to graduate school, it's definitely an option.
That's a great point. Another question we have is, do research programs require specific GPAs? So I think we can talk about this both in terms of grad school, but then also some of these other research programs that you guys have been mentioning and talking about. I guess, Kendall, do you want to talk, I guess, about applying to the post-bac program and maybe like what kind of qualifications they were looking for there?
Yeah, so from what I know from talking to admissions, there is no requirements for GPA. Part of, at least for prep, they actually don't care about your GPA. They're trying to, give you more experience. And so when you're applying to grad school, it's a mixture of things that make you look good. GPA is a small subset, and it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that is, of course, you want to have a good GPA, but don't let that stress you out if you got a D in a class or something like that. That's not going to kill you at all. And so whether it's a post-bac or a graduate program, they're really looking for why you want to go to that program, why you need to be there, and what you're going to add to that. So they're not worried about whether you pass that really hard class that one semester, so you'll be good.
I have to say, I agree with Kendall. And also, lots of places on their websites like to say that they require a certain GPA. Like they'll say, minimum GPA requirement, and they'll list something, but you should apply anyway. So they like to say that because they think it makes them look kind of prestigious. But as Kendall said, GPA is becoming much smaller, and it's actually not a very good predictor of research success. And so a lot of institutions are starting to recognize that. So I say, even if you are way below that required GPA, apply anyway, get a fee waiver and apply anyway, and don't let it discourage you.
Yeah, and I can add to that because I didn't have a great GPA in undergrad. Yeah, apply, ask, and definitely ask for fee waivers, even if it's not listed on their site how to do it. Email them and ask for a fee waiver. More often than not, they will give it to you. That is like one thing I really, really want to stress for applying is the fee waivers.
Sorry about that. Another question we have here is it better or worse to do research in undergrad or to wait to do research after undergrad? And coming from the perspective of graduate school admissions, do they prefer to see one or the other? How are the admissions team kind of looking at this? So Sadie, I'm going to see if you want to kick this off because I think I know you did research experience in undergrad.
Yeah, so I mean, I really don't know if they value one research experience more than the other, undergrad as opposed to postgrad. But if you have a lot of research experience in undergrad, and you don't, want to break from school, I say just apply right away. But something that can sort of discourage programs is if you have a lot of research experience in undergrad and then you take a lot of time off and you don't spend that doing research, then people might ask some questions. It's not the end of the world, but people might ask some questions about what you did with that time. But like we said before, any research is better than no research. I'm not an admissions person, but I personally think these lab technicians and the post-bac programs might be better because you get to spend more time actually doing real research. Whereas when you do it in undergrad, especially if you just do it for a semester, you're not on that project for very long. It's not really your own. You don't really get to develop it. But again, I'm not an admissions person, but that's just my opinion.
I can say a little bit of, I think my one advice for doing research in undergrad is, so for me, I wasn't, because I had to work a part-time job in college, I was only able to get research experience because they offered course credit for it. So for me, it was like an extra class that I was taking, and I didn't have to volunteer extra time outside of an additional class to get that research experience. And so that worked for me. But had I not been given that opportunity to get class credit for the research that I was doing, I would have chosen a completely different route, and probably would have taken that time after undergrad to look for those experiences. And so I really think that if your goal is to get a PhD, the admissions committee wants to see that you have research experience. But where that research experience comes from and what that topic of research is, I don't think, in of course, it's personal opinion, I don't think they have hard and fast rules about what they're looking for. Does anyone else on the panelists want to talk a little bit about that, undergrad and research in undergrad versus afterwards?
Yeah, so I did both. My research experience in undergrad was more like helping with everybody's projects, so, genotyping our mouse colony and all of that. So it wasn't as research heavy. I did get a lot more like actual research experience in my technician job because I was able to work on my own project. But we did have a student who had been working in that lab as an undergraduate researcher from her freshman year to her senior year, and she is super successful now. She is at UC Irvine doing really, really well, and she went straight out of undergrad because the research experience that she got in her undergrad looked a lot different than mine. She was able to, not only work on a couple of different PhD students projects, she also was able to towards the end to start her own project that's actually still going on in the lab. So I think it's really, really dependent on the type of research you can get.
That's a great perspective. Okay, so this is an awesome question that just came in, and I think each of our panelists can spend time sharing their experience. Are you all currently doing research in person or virtually? And if virtually, how has that experience been? And I know some of our panelists, including myself, have had experience with younger students coming into the lab or wanting to come into the lab, but having to provide those experiences virtually. So maybe we could talk about that. So I'm just going to go in order of my screen. So Kendall, do you want to start?
Yes, so I am my first year and I am in my first rotation. My lab had virtual and in-person options, but I chose the virtual because things were so confusing and I wasn't sure how Philly was going to go about. And I'm really grateful that I chose virtual because Philly just shut down again. But it's actually been a really positive experience. I had none, zero coding experience before this, had no clue what I was doing. And it's been positive for me. I've learned about coding. I've learned about brain simulations, programs I've never heard of. And I think it's been really useful because it allows me to see how science can be applied differently. My lab, I also should add, is a bioengineering lab, so it's not even in neuroscience. So that's just a little tidbit for people who are like, I don't do neuroscience, how can I get in? Well, everyone's doing neuroscience. But I think that it's actually added to my perspective and how I want to approach my future thesis project when that time comes far from now, because I think that it has allowed me to be well-rounded as a scientist and not limit myself. I think that if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have never tried to attempt coding. And so I think that's really positive, but also, like I said earlier, that my lab has in-person options. So I have gone in the lab a couple of times to watch cell culture, but I don't do any of it. It's just for me to get an idea of what some in-person options were in my lab. And so I say all of this to say that when you go in grad school, whether we're still in the pandemic or not, I don't think that you should stop yourself from trying to try new techniques just because they're very intimidating, because coding sounds very intimidating to me and I am doing it right now. But I think that you should like just go after all of your opportunities, even if it interests you. And I think that's been really good out of this pandemic for me, because I would have never done that before.
Thanks, Kendall. Candace, do you want to go next?
Sure. So for my lab, we had reduced hours for a long time. So we were half in lab and half online, and very similar to Kendall. So when you're working from home, you have to find a way to do something from home that's related to your research. So coding was one of the things that I actually have been working on during this pandemic. And it's been nice doing it from home because it's a very like focused amount of time that you can dedicate to something very specific. And then I'm also in the process of writing a review paper, so I can also do that from home. So I've been able to focus on things more and kind of split my time in an efficient way. So I feel like I'm not trying to rush everything while I'm in lab. And then the hours that I was going into the lab, I can conduct my research as normal, which has been nice. And now we're back to more of fully back to where we were. So I'm in lab most of the time. So it's pretty much back to normal, which has been nice, but we're lucky to have like a large lab space and we don't have many people. So I feel completely safe in lab. So that hasn't been an issue. But definitely balancing the work from home and then also having to do stuff in lab has just given me more opportunities to learn more things and build up my skills that will definitely come into play in my future graduate career.
Kendra, do you want to tell people about your virtual rotation experiences?
Yeah, so I'm a first year like Kendall, but my experience has been quite different. So Drexel, I guess, obviously nobody can predict the future with what's happening. So for us, instead of focusing on the rotations right now, they kind of front loaded us with more of the graduate classes to get those out of the way so that when we are fully functioning and able to open back up, we can spend a lot more time in the lab. We have done 3 rotations since starting, so about a month and a half, and all of those have been completely virtual. Mine have ranged from, reading papers, coming up with like a basic like idea of what project I could do if I joined the lab, to having PIs say, focus on classes. I know you're super overwhelmed right now. We can do the rotation in person. So it's really, really dependent on your PI and what you can do at home. I personally, the type of labs I'm rotating in don't really have too much computational stuff. So I've mainly just been doing classes and like attending lab meetings and kind of getting a feel for the different labs, like their like the interpersonal dynamics, as well as the types of research that I might be interested in pursuing.
Thank you, Kendra. Sadie, do you want to go next?
Yes, so for the older year students at Drexel, I think we were completely shut down for about 6 months from March till August. So nobody was allowed to come into the labs unless you had some very special permission for some sort of reason. And so I was in like a lucky situation where I had a lot of like data that I was sitting on that I had been putting off analyzing. So my PI is actually from Japan. And so he had an idea about how this pandemic was going to go back in December and January when it was really starting up in Asia. And so he told us, he was like, okay, you need to prepare. Don't analyze any data now. Do as many experiments as you can so you can have as much to do as possible when you go home, which was great because I felt like I didn't even take a day off when I was working from home. I was analyzing data. I was writing grants. I was really surprised at how much I was actually able to get done and how I was able to still be productive. So that was just because of his foresight. And so then now, as Candace said, we were sort of ramping up research from a few hours a week. And then now I think we're pretty much back to full time in the lab. And like Candace said, I have felt very safe in lab. As researchers, we tend to be very good with PPE. Everybody has their masks on at all times. Everybody's good at distancing. We have had a few cases in our department, but none of them have spread. And so I think that really is a testament to how serious everybody is taking it. Yeah.
Finally, we'll have Tara share her perspective.
So when we first started to close down, I actually was deemed essential. So I didn't really miss too many days in lab. I was probably going in every other day instead of every day, but still going in. I think we stopped for about maybe a month and a half, completely stopping. And then when we started being like 50-50 home, we started writing grants. We're always writing papers. I did start doing some sequencing analysis. So that's a lot of bioinformatics. That's a lot to learn, and probably best to do at home where you can just stare at the computer screen for hours. And then when we started, we always get med students in the summer, so we haven't had a lot of opportunities for those students to come in. So what we started doing was FaceTiming or video chatting with these students while we're in lab and trying to show them what we're doing while we're doing it. And I think that actually helps them a lot for their rotations, because it's really difficult for them to get any kind of experience right now. And then also because we're in and out, being in cell culture and doing cell culture is actually pretty easy. You can go in and out in like a couple hours and change your media and then be out quickly. So I have felt safe. I've been here a lot. I feel like our labs also doesn't have too many people, so we can be in here. Plus our PI never comes in, so we always take his hours. So that's how it hasn't been too bad for us, at least.
And I'll just share my own personal experience very briefly. So for my lab, just like the nature of experiment. So my PI is from China, so he also had a lot of good foresight, kind of about what was like the shutdown before it actually was forced to shut down. But due to the nature of my experiments, they just take a long time. There wasn't like I couldn't really plan for that and have a lot. So I had a little bit of data that I needed to analyze. Conveniently for me, I was ready to get my thesis committee together, but just hadn't taken the time to do that yet. And so the pandemic allowed me to sit at home and spend time just writing my thesis proposal and getting my committee together. And I'm so thankful that I was kind of able to do all of that without the added pressure of completing my experiments at the same time. So I really enjoyed that. Now I'm pretty much back to work full time. That's mainly because we just have a really small laboratory right now. So just due to social distancing guidelines, I'm able to kind of be in as much as I want. And so that's been great for me. Since I enjoy doing my experiments. But one thing I wanted to share is that my lab, you guys heard Sadie mention about the STAR summer program that Drexel offers for undergraduate research experience. And I know many other programs do as well. And we took a student during COVID and I worked with the student, and together we read the literature and were able to write a small review paper. And so as an undergraduate student who was studying biology, that was really great for her because it was kind of her first experience to neuroscience research. And we got to talk a lot about the kinds of experiments and the techniques that go on, and learn about how to technically write about those, even though she wasn't able to get that hands-on experience. And so she completed her summer or her STAR summer program virtually, but now that there's a little bit more opportunity, she may be, my PI is going to allow her to volunteer in the lab this year, so that even though she missed out on that STAR summer even though she missed out on the hands-on experience this summer, she made that connection with my PI, got some writing experience, and is now going to be able to get future research experience with us as well. So don't let the pandemic, I think, discourage you from reaching out and seeing what's out there, because even though these programs might not be exactly what they envisioned to be, you're still able to make these connections with these people that you can continue on to have these relationships with, and then maybe get those in-person experiences when the world kind of opens back up for us to do so. And so for our final question, could each of our panelists give for those who have experienced it, a brief overview of what your graduate school rotations looked like without COVID? Sadie, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I'll start. So when I came to Drexel, the rule was they like PhD students to do 3 rotations in 3 different labs. And the first one usually lasts from August through December. The next one is January until the summertime. And then you can do a 3rd one in the summer if you want. And so they also offered for me to start rotating the summer before I came to graduate school, but I told them, no way, I need a summer, I'm exhausted. So I took the whole summer off. I didn't do anything. I just relaxed. I babysat for money, but that was it. I just relaxed. I needed that time to really recharge. And it didn't affect me or my productivity at all once I entered graduate school. I didn't feel like I was behind. So that's important. If you need a break, you should take it. So I entered my current PI's lab first, and I really liked it. He asked me to stay in the lab after only about a month of me rotating. And so I was like, well, I need to see what other labs are here, need to rotate a little bit. But by the end of my time with him in December, I knew that was where I wanted to stay. And so I sort of set up like a short rotation with the other cell biology lab to learn some techniques that they were doing. And then I brought them back to our lab. So I was able to learn something new with some experts. And then now these are techniques, brand new techniques for our lab, which we get to do all the time. And so then of course I didn't end up doing a third rotation, but I feel like that was a little bit of a special case. Like my PI really needed another student. He had just gotten a grant. And there was only really 2 cell biology labs, and that was really what I was interested in. So that was my experience.
Tara, do you want to talk about your rotation experience?
Sure. So mine's also kind of unique, but the opposite way. I actually did 4 rotations. This is my 4th rotation, which was about a year ago. I've only been in this lab for about a year. I came in, I wanted to do cystic fibrosis research, which there's only one lab in all of Drexel that does that. And it's a very bioinformatic lab. So it's Josh Mel's lab. So I went there first. I loved his lab and I love him. And now we're actually collaborators currently in my current lab with him. And then being an MCBG student, it's also hard to find funding for our students. We're not like neuroscience where there's money in neuroscience for sure. So that's kind of what brought me to my 4th rotation at this lab. The 2nd and 3rd were just kind of quick requirement ones where we had to get them done for our program. Did an RNA one, which was pretty cool, and then another one that was kind of neuroscience, but not really. So it was like Alzheimer's and astrocytes. So then leading to here after prelims and all that stuff. It's a little different for our program because I think you have to do 3 for MCBG because they're shorter. And I did start in the summer as well, so I started back in August versus September. Sorry, that was kind of all over the place.
No, you're fine. Candace, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so my rotations were similarly set up to Sadie since we're in the same program, but I had a year off between undergrad and graduate school. So when they asked if we could start in the summer, I was like, dear God, yes, please. Can I start in the summer? I was also really nervous because I had no neuroscience experience. So I was just excited to do anything and everything. So my first rotation was actually in a spinal cord lab. And I absolutely loved it. The PI wanted me to stay and I was like, I'm probably going to stay because I love you. I love your lab. Everything's great. And then I rotated with my current PI and I was like, oh, this is actually great. I really like the research. So yeah, I did both full length rotations. Both were about 6 months. And then the spinal cord, it still gave me interest because it showed that you can just study specific circuits and manipulate specific circuits, even though it's in the spinal cord. But I kind of took that interest and then brought it to the brain, where I found my current home and where I will stay is within the brain. So yeah, I did both full length rotations and I only did 2 because the lab that I'm in now, and I did that rotation, I definitely didn't need a 3rd one. It was just a perfect fit. Everyone in the lab was so great. And then the mentor, I really needed hands-on experience and he understood that. So that was awesome. And yeah, so I didn't feel the need to do a 3rd rotation. So I just did 2 of them.
Thanks, Candace.
Oh, Nancy, you muted
myself.
Okay.
So I'll just briefly touch on my experience. So I came to Drexel to work with my PI, which is sometimes a risky situation. But when you're, especially so neuroscience research is very broad. And so the type of research that is done at neuroscience programs across the country is very different, just because of how broad the field of neuroscience is. And I'm very passionate about mental health research. And also combining that with kind of understanding like the physiology of our brain circuits and how they're disrupted in mental health disorders. And there are only a handful, I really felt like my PI was the only one at Drexel who kind of fit that role for me. And so before I applied, I emailed him and asked him if he was taking students. And then when I interviewed with him, I asked him again if he was gonna like accept someone into his lab. And so I did my first rotation with him. And what these rotations look like what you actually do in the rotation really depends on the lab and what their structure is. My PI happened to have a senior postdoc at the time who kind of took me under his wing. I didn't have any experience doing the type of research that they do. In undergrad, I did psychology research with rats, and I just put them in an operant box and then took them out. And that was the extent of my animal handling experience. But we do a lot more intensive animal work here. So I was trained on a lot of techniques I hadn't learned before. And that took me about half of the rotation, so a 6-month rotation. And then, so that was about 3 months of just like learning the techniques and getting good at them. And then the last 3 months, I piloted a small project. And was able to collect a little bit of data. But the rotations can look kind of vastly different depending on how the lab is organized, and what experience you have will kind of change what that looks like. I don't know why my thing keeps muting myself. I'm sorry. So we got another question in. So what kind of summer internships or research opportunities would you recommend that could be done virtually, such as research related to bioinformatics? So having a STAR, I'm just going to start this off because I just had that STAR summer student. So what I just want to say is the normal research structured programs that exist, if they are still accepting students, they will figure that out for you. So if they say like, so the pandemic is going on and they say, go ahead and apply anyways, they have figured out some type of way that they are going to make that program virtual for you. So if you're going the program route, that would be one way to do it. Just apply to the ones that are already open and kind of accept, I guess, the structure that they have redesigned to facilitate it in the pandemic. Does anyone else have any other suggestions for that? It looks like Ken.
Yeah. So like Nancy said, that they like tend to match you, but if you have like some type of questions about the type of research, you can also reach out to those program directors for whether it be a summer or post-bac program and say, am I able to do research in a bioinformatics lab? I know that for some programs, they're funded by specific grants. So sometimes the grants are very specific in what type of research you're able to do. So you just want to make sure that you're able to do the type of research you're interested in and don't feel limited if you were to get into that program. So I can speak specifically for like the CERPs and the REUs and the like preps and NIH IRTA, all of those you get matched with the lab that you're interested in. They don't just give you a lab. You choose the labs that you're interested in. So that should be some type of encouragement for doing type of bioinformatics work. But if you have any questions, the director's emails are a really good resource. They tend to respond really fast because they know a lot of people have questions about their programs. So if you want to do a very specific type of research like bioinformatics and you have questions, email them. And even like said earlier about the research text, you can have they emailed those PIs. There's PIs who will take you as a research tech also, and just say like, yeah, you're not a part of a program, but I'll take you as some extra hands and I'm willing to train you. So you never know. Some PIs are just willing to take you under their wing.
I can add, so my previous PI, who I was a tech for, I never in a million years would have thought that anything could have been done online, but she took, I think 2 or 3 STAR students and a couple of new technicians. And from what I have heard, it's all online. They're all able to do bioinformatics and have like a meaningful research experience. So I do think it's worth it to, if you do want to work with a specific PI, even if you don't think that there are any opportunities for online research experience, to reach out to them and just ask. The worst that they can say is no. And the best that they can say is, yes, I have this amazing project that I've been waiting for somebody to want to do.
Another like little piece of advice I would say is to maybe just change the wording of your email. So instead of asking if maybe phrasing your question in such a way of, I know that the pandemic is ongoing, if you're reaching, and so this is for people who maybe are interested in reaching out to individual labs, you could just rephrase your question to ask, is there any type of virtual virtual work that your lab has that I could get involved in? So like for our lab, for example, we do a lot of animal behavior. That's all recorded and needs to be manually scored. And it's actually better for someone who wasn't involved in the experiment to score that data, because they couldn't be biased because they have absolutely no idea what happened in the room. So for our lab, it's great to have people learning how to score behavior data is something that could be very easily done virtually. So one suggestion could be to just specifically phrase your email in such a way that doesn't allow them to say, hey, no, sorry, we don't have in-person research, but to let them know that you're willing to do that type of virtual option. Were you going to say something, Sadie?
Yeah, so just we got some info from one of our other NGSD members. So apparently REUs and SURF applications open in December, and they're due in January and March. So that's important info for anybody who's interested in applying. Oh, you're muted, Dance.
I have no idea why it keeps doing that. But so I just dropped the link for all the attendees. And so this link should be a list where you can see some of these different REU and SURF options that are going on this upcoming summer. So I think that was our last question. So I want to thank you all so much for attending our panel today. This will be available in some format, the recording will, and if you didn't get a chance to attend our first two talks, we will also have those available as well. So please feel free to reach out to us at our email or any of our social media accounts. And we're happy to serve as mentors to you guys throughout your process and figuring out, how to get involved in research. So if you'd like to reach out to any of us individually, you can reach out through our NGSD Gmail, and we will contact you back through our personal emails. So thank you guys so much for coming, and we look forward to talking with you in the future. Take care.